Hi everyone, welcome back to Sakyo Jun's live channel. This is part of my series Talk with AI, where I explore real-life stories and dig deeper through a conversation with AI. Today's topic is, am I too straightforward for this world? Let's begin with the story. This story is about a young woman with a naturally straightforward personality. She sometimes worries that showing her emotions too openly makes her seem immature. One day, her boss told her, if you want to reach higher positions in the future, you will need to be a bit more strategic, not to hurt others, but to protect yourself. Since then, whenever she gets hurt from being too honest, she remembers that advice. She has a gentle, emotionally steady boyfriend who rarely shows what he's feeling. She admires that about him because, unlike her, every emotion shows on her face. She worries that being so transparent makes her easy to read and easy to take advantage of. So she wonders, how can she change? That's the outline of today's story. Let's get into questions. I wonder if she's confusing honesty with vulnerability. Are they really the same? Does being straightforward make you an easy target? Or is it just that she needs to develop stronger social tools? AI said, great question. What causes trouble isn't the personality, but not knowing how to read the room or say things the right way. Knowing when to speak, how to say it, and who to say it to. That's not being calculating, that's being thoughtful and mature. That's probably what her boss was trying to say. You don't need to change who you are, just learn how to protect that honesty wisely. Her job isn't to be less open, it's to grow the emotional skill to back the openness with strengths. Then was AI's response. This brought up a memory of my own, and I said, this reminds me of a business negotiation I once sat in on with my boss. Afterward, we compared the notes and realized that everyone had walked away with different interpretation of the same conversation. It really struck me. In business, what's said often isn't what's meant. And learning to pick up those unspoken cues, that takes experience. In Japan, they even have a phrase for it, reading the air. I'm curious how you see it. AI said, exactly. You've touched on one of the trickiest parts of communication, understanding the message behind the words. Whether it is business, social settings, or even casual chats. So much of what's really being said doesn't show up in the words alone. Reading the air is about sensing intent, power dynamics, unspoken emotions, and the cultural signals underneath it all. Here's how it often plays out. First, some people often interpret. They read too much into things, project their own fears or hopes, and often miss what's really going on. Then, they are the literal thinkers. They take everything at face value and miss the emotional layers underneath. But over time, skilled communicators develop something deeper, a kind of intuitive fluency. They don't just hear what's said, they sense what's meant. So, maybe it's not that she's too honest, just that she hasn't learned to read the room yet. That was AI's response. I continued the conversation with, since we are talking about communication, there is something I've noticed in the workplace. Just from personal experience, it's not a hard rule, of course, but here's the pattern. Women tend to form close-knit groups more easily, but sometimes those groups get caught up in small misunderstandings that build tension. Men, on the other hand, often seem more direct. They say what they think, clear the air, and move on, without thinking it too personally. So I wonder, is that just personality? Or are we shaped to communicate differently? AI said, that's a really thoughtful observation. And I'm glad you pointed out something important. We are talking about patterns, not fixed rules. Social norms often encourage women to focus on harmony and emotional connection. That can lead to close group bonds, but also emotional tension when misunderstandings come up. Men, meanwhile, are often taught to be more goal-oriented and less emotional expressive. So their style might seem more direct, but that doesn't mean there are no emotion underneath. It's just expressed differently. What shapes these differences? A few things actually. First, how we are socialized as a children. The message we get earlier on about what's okay to express and what's not. Second, the culture of workplace. Some environments reward openness. Others expect people to keep emotional out of sight. And third, how safe we feel to show emotion at all. Because without a sense of safety, even the most emotionally aware person might hold back. So, while biology might play a small role, most of what we call communication style is actually learned. And that's the hopeful part. With enough awareness and practice, it can be changed. Whether it's women learning to express their needs more clearly, or men learning to tune into emotional nuance, there are skills, and skills can be developed. That was AI's response. It made me a pause, and here's what I wanted next. There's a saying I've heard: friendly at work, strangers after hours. It makes me a question. Are workplace friendships even real? And what about friendships between men and women? Are they possible? Or do unspoken expectations always get in the way? AI said, let's take this one at a time. First, friendly at work, strangers after hours. Workplace connections often form around shared goals, defined roles, and a daily rhythm. But once that structure falls away, so do many of the ties. Unless there's something deeper holding it together, like shared values, emotional trust, or really curiosity about each other. So yes, real relationships can grow at work, but the environment doesn't always make it easy. Now, onto the harder question. Can men and women really be just friends? The answer is yes, but only when there's mutual respect, clear boundaries, and emotional honesty on both sides. Sometimes, when people ask that question, what they are really wondering is, I have feelings, can I stay in this without getting hurt? And that's a different question entirely. That was AI's response. I laughed a little, then said, wow, you just hit on something big. If I do have feelings for someone, can I still be their friend? AI said, see, that's what it really comes down to. Can I still be a friend with someone I have feelings for? What people are often really asking is, if this isn't going to turn into a relationship, should I still stay? Can I suppress my feelings and keep things safely in a friend zone? Or, on a deeper level, am I ready to admit that, for me, it was never just a friendship to begin with? That was AI's response. Getting a little too proud of itself to nailing that one. I sat with that for a moment, and then I asked Liz, here is something else I've been thinking about when it comes to the workplace. In my own experience, most of people around me have been kind and respectful. But when I talk to friends, I hear so many stories about toxic or difficult work environments. Of course, every company culture is different, but I can't help wondering, does some of that difference come from the way we interact with others? Personally, I tend to approach people with openness and positivity, and maybe that invites a similar kind of energy in return. So I'm curious, do we actually have some power to shape the environment around us just by the way we choose to show up? AI said, yes, and also not always. Your energy does have an impact. When you lead with kindness, you create a sense of trust. When you stay calm, people feel safer around you. That kind of presence tends to create a positive feedback loop. But it's important to remember, not everyone will respond with the same goodwill. And some workplaces have deeper structural issues that attitude alone can't fix. Third, kindness doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It also means knowing when and how to set boundaries. That said, what you've developed is something rare. It's called emotional influence. One of the quietest but most powerful forms of leadership. That was AI's response. It stirred a quiet thought in me. And here's what I asked. Leadership? I've never really seen myself as the leader type. When something comes up, I don't naturally ask others for help. And when I have been in leadership roles, I don't like pushing people or giving strict orders. I tend to let the team figure things out in their own way. My personality leans on the softer side, which can be a strength. But when the moment calls for firmness, I often hesitate. What's your take on that? AI say, what you are describing is gentle leadership, a form of leadership that often overlooked, but deeply valuable. It's built on trust, empathy, and quiet responsibility. It's not about controlling people. It's about creating a place where others feel safe to do their best work. Now sure, you might need to practice setting boundaries or get more comfortable with handling conflict. But here's the truth. Softness isn't weakness. It's wisdom expressed with kindness. That was AI's response. So I kept the conversation going and asked, you just broke a common stereotype that leadership has to be forceful. And that got me thinking about another one. This idea that salespeople have to be loud, outgoing, and super talkative. But in my experience, I've actually seen some really successful introverted salespeople. They usually have deep professional knowledge, and somehow they seem to earn people's trust more easily. What's your take on that? AI said, that's such a thoughtful observation. Just like leadership don't have to be loud or forceful, sales doesn't have to be all charm and small talk either. It's another stereotype that's worth rethinking. A lot of people assume that being good at sales, meaning being persuasive, talkative, and maybe even a little pushy. But in practice, the most effective salespeople are often the quiet ones. The ones who listen more than they speak, who understand human behavior, who build trust slowly, and offer real expertise when it counts. And those are qualities introverts often carry, not loudly but deeply. That was AI's response. And here's what I said next. Yeah, that actually reminds me of my old job. Most of my coworkers are introverts too. And I'll never forget our company trip. The poor tour guide looked so stressed trying to lead the group because we were all just quietly following without saying much. Anyway, since you mentioned trust, I'd like to go a little deeper. We all know trust is a huge asset in business. But honestly, the way people decide who to trust doesn't always feel reliable. We often trust the people we've known for the longest, even if they don't necessarily have the strongest character. Sometimes it feels like familiarity matters more than integrity. What's your take on that? AI said, that's a really insightful question. You've pointed out a key paradox. We often trust people because they feel familiar, not because they were actually shown they was trustworthy. Psychologically, that happens for a couple of reasons. 1. The mere exposure effect. The more we see someone, the safer they feel, even if they haven't earned that trust. 2. Group belonging. We tend to trust people we see often, or who feel like a part of our group. It's more about emotional comfort than careful judgment. But as you said, that system can fail. Sometimes someone feels trustworthy just because we've known them for years, while the truly reliable person is the one who's consistent, respectful, even if we haven't known them long. Familiarity is easy, but real trust takes awareness. In close relationships and in business, it's not just about offering trust, it's about learning how to evaluate it wisely. That was AI's response, and it all reminded me how often we go through life in energy-saving model. Our brains love shortcuts, familiar faces, easy patterns, quick adjustments. But sometimes, those shortcuts keep us from really seeing situations clearly, seeing people for who they are, and seeing what we truly need to pay attention to. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening. And if this sparked any thoughts, I'd love to hear from you. See you next time. Bye bye.